Hey everyone, welcome to Watercolor. We're going to do our first watercolor today. I just want to go ahead and give you the heads up. My voice is a little scratchy. I'm getting over something, and I may need to blow my nose at times, so I'm just letting you know ahead of time. What I'm going to do, so today we're painting a snowy landscape. I've tried to stay with a theme of winter, at least here in the northern hemisphere. It is winter. It's not cold yet, but it is winter. So I am sticking with that theme. Also, I tried to choose today's painting is a little simpler. There's not a whole lot of detail in it. It's a landscape, which are generally easier to do in watercolor. So that's why I chose that. Just want to talk a little bit about supplies. So as you can see, I've got here, you do not need the color wheel. I'm going to use that to show you guys something. But you do need your paints. If you are using these are tube paints, but if you're using a tray that has pre-mixed colors, then you just need a medium or light yellow, some type of red. I would go more towards like a cool red, which would be more of a pinkish red. This looks pink here. It is called phthalo crimson, but it is a little bit more red. What I have here, just to go through, is cadmium yellow pale or light, phthalo crimson, phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, and burnt umber. Now, so you've got a brown, a red, and a yellow, but you've got two blues. And the reason is one is a warm blue and one is a cool blue. So you can see the colors there, but I wanted to use the color wheel to show you guys, and maybe actually this even shows it better, but cool blues are going to be more on the green side, meaning that like a sky blue would be a cool blue. I just said that wrong. Those are the warm blues. The warm blues are more on the green side. The cool blues are more on the purple side. So that would be the ultramarine. I apologize for that. I was still thinking of the reds. So the phthalo blue is the warm blue. Again, more on the green side. And then the ultramarine blue is the cool blue, which is more on the purple side. So that's how you would choose. So hopefully if you do have a palette of pre-mixed paints, like the little wells of paints, that you have two different blues, a warmer and a cooler blue. Almost did it again. Okay, so that was why I was using the color wheel, was just to show that to you. Now, I may end up using the color wheel again. I don't think so in this class, but in other classes I may. That was not something that you needed. The other thing, so you have your paints, you have brushes. These are the same brushes we use in acrylic. I've got this is a 3/4 wash brush in Grumbacher, or you could use a 10 or 12 Filbert in other brands. This is a size 6 round brush. You could also use an 8, would be fine. Maybe a 4, but I would probably stay a little bit bigger, just because you can get fine points just by lightening your pressure. So that's a good start, so that you get plenty when you press down, that you get plenty of spread. Okay, so those are your two brushes. Also, we will need a pencil. So an HB pencil is what you want, and it should have the type of pencil up at the top. If you don't have an HB pencil, that is the same thing as a regular number 2 pencil. The only difference is when you buy an art pencil, it's a little bit higher quality. That's it. Okay. The reason we use pencils in watercolors, we do need to do quite a bit of planning. Just because watercolor is completely additive, you cannot We are going to be subtracting some color today, but you can't subtract it completely out. And so if you put the wrong color in the wrong place, that's pretty much it. You're always going to have a tint of that color on the paper. What I'm going to be showing you how to do when you subtract is just to create highlights, but you won't ever get rid of the color completely. So we want to work light to dark, and we want to make sure that we've planned out where we want everything to go before we start. So that's what the pencils are for. In that vein, I also have an eraser. I rarely use it because we're just sketching, but I have one just in case. We're not going to be drawing very dark, so it's just to sketch out an idea of where we're going to be. I also have a palette knife. Now I'm using a little bit smaller flat palette knife. You can see I don't have any on me, but some palette knives bend or curve. I'm just using a small flat one because it's easier to mix in the, because we're going to be using very tiny amounts of paint. Watercolor goes a really long way. A palette and paper, watercolor paper. Now here's the kind that I'm using right now. It is Strathmore, and I use cold press. I don't think it necessarily matters for this type of watercolor, but cold press is usually a little less expensive. The watercolor paper I'm using, I don't actually think this says the weight on it. It is 140 pound is the weight. It has it down here at the bottom. So with watercolor paper, you do want to use a heavier weight. What the weight means, so your standard piece of paper, like copy paper or printer paper, is somewhere between 20 to 25 pounds. So very thin. Cardstock is generally between 80 and 110 pounds. And cardstock is, like you think of a greeting card, a little bit thicker, cardboard, more like paper. Watercolor is 130 and above. So I'm using 140. The thicker the watercolor paper you get, of course, the more it's going to withstand the maneuverability of the water. Because the water is going to try to move. It's going to change the consistency of the paper, so the thicker paper will withstand some of that. 140 is probably, that's pretty low on the scale, because this is just paper that I got this. It is a notebook of paper, and I got that at Michael's craft store. So most of the paper that you're going to be able to get at a craft store is going to be in the lower weight. And that's just because the higher quality paper, like Arches, for example, is a good brand. Reeves is another good brand. Those would be from like an actual art store, an art supply store. So and they are quite a bit more expensive. I do suggest, if you want to get the higher end paper, buy it in the very large sheets. I don't know what the sizes of those are. I want to say maybe 24 by 36 or 30 by 40, something like that. They're very large, and then just cut them down, like cut it into fours or cut them down to the size that you want. For today, we're going to be using a 9 by 12, as I do all my other classes. 9 by 12 is our standard, and we are going to be working in the landscape orientation. So let's go ahead and get started. I am going to put my hair back because I just realized that it's bugging me. So I'm just going to do a quick little braid. So be patient with me. The other thing about the paper I can go ahead and talk to you about is you'll notice that there are two sides to it. Now, your higher quality paper may be rough on both sides, but the paper that you can get from the craft store is going to have a smooth side and a rough side. So your rough side is the side we're going to be painting on, and that is because it catches the paint better. in the little grooves that is made. Those are called teeth. So if you get really high quality watercolor paper, a lot of times it will tell you the tooth size on it. So this paper does not. It's just a very minimal tooth, but you can feel the difference. So on the back, you can see, like, you guys probably can't see this just with the detail of my camera, but you can still see the pattern, but if you feel it, it's smooth, whereas the other side is most definitely has like a grit to it. So that's the side we'll be using. One more thing, you do need a cup of water. So I've got my water here, and I'm just using an old plastic cup. Let's see, this is a Five Nights at Freddy's cup. I believe that was my nephew's. Who am I kidding? It was mine. Okay, so first things first is we're going to go ahead and take our pencil, and we're going to draw our horizon line. Now, I want my horizon line, let's see. I'm looking at the image. So I've talked a little bit before about where you draw your horizon line. It depends on the level of interest that's going on in the foreground or the background. So if you've got more interest in the sky, you want to draw a lower horizon line. This is especially true if you're drawing like mountains, just anything where you're going to have a lot going on in the background. The foreground is generally, in a lot of landscapes, that's where a lot is going on. But in today's landscapes, because we do have mountains in the background, we are going to put our horizon line a little bit lower. So what I always do, and I'm going to get rid of this book underneath so that I have a nice flat surface. You find your middle point, so that's about where my middle point is, and then just come down a little bit. So I'm going to come down. I'm just coming down about an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch below the middle line, and just as loosely as I can, I'm just drawing a line straight across. Now, I don't know if you can see my line. It's very, very light, and that's intentional because we're not going to be erasing this line at any point. So we want once we start painting over it, it's more difficult to erase, and it can pull up because of the paper's been wet. It can actually pull up chunks of the paper, and you can lose color. So we're not going to be erasing it. The paint will cover most of it, but draw light just in case. Okay. Now we're going to go down about an inch. And this is going to be our lake. We're going to do a little like shoreline. So we're going to go down about an inch and draw approximately halfway across the page. Now, we're going to do 2 more lines in the foreground, and that will be it's really good for me going to be 1 line, but you can do it as 2 lines, and that is the shorebed, the shoreline that's coming towards us. So there's going to be one kind of going this way and one going that way. Now I'm curving mine a little bit down, so if everybody can see that. And that just gives it some visual interest. All right, now we're going to draw our mountains. So we want our mountains to be kind of wavy because that will give it the, kind of a natural appearance. So I'm determining how I want to do this. Let's see. All right, so we're going to start probably about 1.5 inches above, and we're going to have just a kind of a scraggly line coming up, coming back down. We can come pretty close to our shoreline, and I'm going up and down, like giving it like kind of the natural bumps that you might see in a mountain. I'm still staying a little above, like maybe at least 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch higher than our shoreline. Okay, I'm going to stop my line here. I'm going to start a new line down here and kind of just reach up. I'm going up in the sky. I'm going to stop that line there. And let's see, maybe about between where that last line started and the edge of the paper, about the middle. I'm going to start another line and come up there. So here's what I have. You can see that. All right. So let's see. All right. I'm trying to think. I think we're done with the drawing part of it. I don't think we need to plan anything else out. So now we're going to go ahead and mix our paints. So the first thing we're going to do is get our phthalo blue, which, just to remind you, is the warm color. And we are going to mix a little bit of this. Now, you do not need much at all, depending on if you are using wells where it's already, the palette, it's already like in little, their own little containers, then you want to pick up, wet your brush a little bit and pick up quite a bit of color. And usually those cases have trays like in the lid of it. So if you open it up, you can use the lid as a mixing tray. So I would take some of your warm color. You're going to take some of your cool blue color, in this case the ultramarine, same amounts. So we're mixing, and you don't need much at all. But like I said, if you're using those trays, you want to pick up a decent amount just because you're getting an already watered down version of that. And I have a concentrated version here. And then we're going to mix some burnt umber. I'm just putting just a little bloop of burnt umber, not quite as much as the two blues. In a separate well, we are going to put yellow. Our cadmium yellow pale is what I'm using. Any yellow is fine. And this is not wanting to open. So there's a little trick for this. So I'm going to put this in my water for a second. Warm water works the best, but since I'm not right here in front of the sink. So what I'm doing, I'll show you guys. I'm just kind of like, I've got it upside down in the water and I'm just kind of stirring it around. Now let's see. I'm going to use a paper towel to kind of, I'm sticking my nail into it, like into the crevice to get some of the extra paint out. Because all that has happened is that the paint has dried in there. There we go. All right. Usually just getting it, re-wetting it is fine. Watercolor is great. You can save your colors if you do not have to wash your colors because they can be re-wet at any point in time. I've had watercolors that I found a palette that had been sitting in one of my art boxes for, I don't know, it was a good 10, 15 years, something like that. And I was able to re-wet the colors and use them. So you can actually use watercolors for quite a long time. Okay, now excuse me. I do need to... Thank you for being patient with me. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to use, let's see. Let's start with let's actually start with our smaller brush, our round brush. Now, there's a technique. We're going to muddy the colors here. There's a technique for this where you just get your brush wet. So I'm just stirring my brush around, kind of flattening it on the bottom. And I'm not wiping it on the side of the cup. I'm just putting water directly into the well. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a little bit more water. I'm going to start mixing the side. I'm not putting my paint, if you notice, I just did it. I'm not putting my brush directly into the paint. I'm just mixing, I'm just moving the water back and forth. This is a technique for basically making a soupy color without putting your brush directly in the paint. The reason why you don't want to put your brush directly in the paint is because it can, you don't want the undiluted color. Sometimes you do, and we may actually use that technique in this, but this particular painting. But for most stuff, you want the paint to be more soupy, and you don't want the full concentrated color on your brush. So this way you avoid it without having to go rinse your brush off and waste a little bit of color. Okay, so I always just look. I want to make sure my soup is the same color as my my paint. Okay, now I will wash my brush. You're still gonna have some solid paint in there, so I do still have some paint. Just a reminder, when you're washing your brush, you paint the bottom of the paint of the cup. Like you pretend like you're painting the bottom of the cup, and that will help clean your brush better. And then you just get any excess color off with a paper towel. All right, now we need to do the same thing. Now here's the thing, we need to mix these colors first because we put them together. So I've got my palette knife. I'm gonna mix everything together. This is giving us a very dark medium blue. Because we're mixing the two, the warm and the cool together, it's going to end up giving us like a little bit of a grayish color. Okay, so you just mix that up. I'm just going to wipe that off with my paper towel, and then we're going to do the exact same thing we did. Now because it's mixed, it's not in that nice little lump before, so we're going to have to pay closer attention. I get water on there and I do like 3 drops, and you can wipe it on the side of the top of the well. So I'm doing 3 drops of water, and then you just tilt it a little bit, and that gets your water over so you don't have to touch it. And I'm just, let's move this over here. There we go. It's picking up the color. Doesn't always pick up the color right away. So I'm just moving back and forth. All that's doing is agitating it and kind of getting the water to pull the paint color out. Now, once it's about the same color and transparency of the paint, so you want to make sure you can't see through it, basically. You want it to be more opaque, which, if you remember from my very first lesson, opacity is how see-through something is. The more opaque, the less see-through. The less opaque, the more see-through, which we would call transparent. Okay, now we've got our 2 colors. We're going to put just a little bit of our phthalo blue, which is the warm blue. We're going to put just a little bit of that by itself, but we're not going to water it down. I'm always very careful with these particular paints. I use Grumbacher Academy. You can see the A there for Academy. But I always use Grumbacher paints because they're very good quality. The only issue is that the way they make their tubes is it's under a lot of pressure. So every time I open it, the paint just starts coming out on its own, which is not fun. So I always just try to be careful with that. Okay, so we're not watering that down. All right, so now what we're going to do is a little bit of a wet on wet technique. Now you may have heard of the wet on wet technique before from the illustrious Bob Ross. Now he uses oil paints, and his paints are wet because oil paints take a long time to dry. Ours is because we're adding water. But the way you do this in watercolor, let me move my water over so you guys can see what I'm doing. So get your brush wet. If it's the first time you're getting your brush wet, go wet. Having trouble talking today. You just move your brush around, pushing it down on the bottom of the cup, and that just kind of gets it. It moves the bristles around and gets water inside all of the bristles. Okay, we are going to take our wet brush. I just tap it a little. I do not wipe it. And we're going to actually brush water directly onto our sky. Now, because you can't really see it that much, you have to kind of tilt it and look and see where the glossiness is. And then when you get close to like your mountains, remember we planned this, you just be extra careful. But I am using my large wash brush because it covers a bigger area. Okay, so you want to work a little bit quickly because you don't want your water to, it's not going to completely dry, but you don't want it to not be wet anymore, and you'll see why. Because we're going to be applying our paint directly to the wet, and it will naturally spread because of the water. And we want that. We want it to be kind of serendipitous as to where the paint goes. We don't want to be too in control of it, or it doesn't look good, or at least it looks too planned. This is why watercolor is my absolute favorite technique, even though, to be perfectly honest, it's not my best. Oil painting is my best. So that is what I'm really good at. I have not done oil painting in a really long time, but it is by far my best medium. But I like watercolor the best because, okay, so we've got our paint. Because it is so haphazard, you don't know what you're going to get. And I really like that aspect to it. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to saturate the sky. All right. Let's see. We want to start light to dark. So we're going to start our yellow color. So you do not have to touch directly to the paint. Again, remember, you just want to get to the edge. It's going to be kind of at the bottom, and all you have to do is just touch it, and it will spread on its own. You can move your paper and tilt it if you want it to spread a little bit more. But we're only putting the yellow kind of down in this general area, like in the space between the two mountains. For now. Well, let's see. Let me look at the reference photo. Well, let's see. The reference photo has it mostly down here, but it does have just a little bit up here. The sun peeking out over the mountains. This is a morning. I feel like this is a morning. Okay, I'm going to let a little bit of yellow go this way, but I'm not being too picky about it. Okay, so go ahead and wash your brush. All right, so now we're going to work with our diluted blue mix, not the pure blue, but the diluted blue. So wet your brush again, and I am wiping it off this time. The only difference is that wiping it off takes off more water than tapping it, and earlier we needed more water. So I'm going to pick some of that up, and I'm just going to let it come in here. And see how it's starting to flow by itself where I painted the yellow? That's great. I love that. Now I'm just very lightly moving my brush side to side, barely touching the canvas, the paper. You don't have to do much. And it will naturally flow into the other color because of the water. Okay. Now I'm going to get more water on my brush. Just paint right here. Pick up some more color. See how it spreads? All I did was touch it in one place. And you can push it. You can push watercolor around and make it spread. So it's not quite like any other paint in that it can be really manipulated on the page. And yet you still don't know exactly where it's going to go. That's what makes it so lovely. It does this fracturing too, where it kind of goes out like a claw, and that just is one of my favorite things that it does. So I'm painting more water down here in this area. We're just going to keep going like this. We're going to fill up the whole sky. Now, my watercolor is pooling a little on the sides because my paper is already bending, and that's going to happen. So I'm going to I'm just going to tilt it a little. You can see the water's already doing it's going into the yellow and doing its own thing. I've already lost a lot of the water up here. Like I said, it doesn't completely dry, but it gets dry enough to where the paint doesn't spread anymore. Now, of course, the sky is darker up towards the top. But because it's morning and it's dawn, really, then it's not too much darker. I am going to wet the yellow down here a little bit. Just a tiny bit. I'm going to let this spread. I'm getting more water and just watering that down and let them kind of spread together. It does create a little bit of a green because blue and yellow do make green, but that's okay. It will look more natural than you think. Hope everybody's having a wonderful day so far. Here it is about 2:30. Okay. And I'm just coming down and lightly touching the edge with just clean water, and that will blend everything together. You can, like I said, you can tilt your paper and watch it kind of spread and do interesting things. This is something you definitely can't really do with oil paints or acrylic. You know, they stay in place. So it's kind of a cool feature of watercolor. Now I'm just going to very lightly dab some areas because it's just a little more color than I really wanted, but that's looking good. Okay. And come back over it with water, and that will kind of it just gives it a splotchy look, I guess is the look that I'm going for. I want it to be kind of a splotchy sky. Okay. I feel pretty comfortable with the way that it looks right now. So next we are going to let's see. What do we want to do next? You know, I just realized too, I forgot to put the, let me go ahead right now while I'm thinking about it. I'm going to flip up the address to my Discord channel, and I'm going to put the reference photo. I can't believe I forgot to do this, but I'm going to put the reference photo in my Discord channel so that everybody has it. But you are welcome to join my Discord channel. This is where we would be, excuse me, this is where we would be sharing our images and discussing them. So please join. You can also share other images that are not related to what I'm teaching if you would like my feedback. Let's see. Okay, landscape. this is the reference image for today's stream. All right, so now everybody should have the reference image. I apologize for that. So that will be out there. All right. Okay, let's get back to this. Now, my paper is doing this funky thing. It's bending right in the middle, and so all the water is going down there. I do not like that. So I am tilting it. See how it's dripping. I'm tilting it so it drips to the side because I don't want it to just be in the middle like that. And you can bend your paper if you need to, if it's going a direction you don't want it to go. I'm going to actually add a little bit more dark color up top. There we go. That evened that out a little bit. And it made it kind of look cloudy a little. You know, we've got some nice morning mist. Okay. So we're going to let this dry just a little bit. Like I said, you can either pick up excess color with your paintbrush after you've washed it and dried off the water, or with a paper towel. I did not mention the paintbrush thing, but that is the other option if you don't want to use a paper towel. The paper towel will pull more paint usually than you want, unless you're specifically going for a super splotchy look. So I would recommend using that once you know what you're doing, like once you feel comfortable with watercolors. So, okay. So what I usually do is I skip sections. So while this section is drying, then we'll skip section and something that doesn't directly touch that area. If we were doing something where there were multiple sections, like I've done a colorful umbrella before, I do every other section. And that way you don't have your paints mixing together while they're drying. Okay, so that being the case, this is bothering me here. There's like some area where it just stopped and there's like this weird abrupt line. So I'm just going in there. My paintbrush is completely dry. It's tiny bit wet, but it allows me to just feather that and just make it a little smoother. Okay. Now we're going to be using our round brush. All right. So we're going to wet this area here right up against, we're on the shoreline. Okay. So on our shoreline, we're wetting the shore side of it, not the water side of it. Now we're going to dip our brush directly into the paint itself, and not the wet part of the color. So I'm going to dip it directly into the paint, and that gets a saturated amount of paint on my brush. And I'm just going to come right along the edge here. See how dark that is? Right along the edge, and paint there. You'll watch it spread. This is probably the most satisfying part of watercolor, is watching it spread, watching the paint do interesting things. Okay. Now, this is not spreading as fast as I would like, so I'm going to wet my brush and dry it a little bit. Well, no, I guess I don't want to dry it. That was just to get the color off, I suppose. With a little bit of water, come in and pull some of the paint up. So you can see there's like little lines where my paintbrush are. We can smooth those out later. I'm just pulling some of the paint in. There we go. Okay, now just plain water. Now we'll go ahead and smooth those out. What we're trying to do is create a little bit of a gradient effect. Gradient meaning it goes from a light to a dark. The dark obviously being our shoreline and the light being further back. Now, let's see. Go up the side. And now I'm just basically painting with water and letting it go into where the previous paint is. That's it. Excuse me just a moment. All right. I do not usually get sick. I just accidentally dropped a little bit of water up there, so I was just spreading it out. Otherwise, it will leave a little dot where the water was, so I didn't want that to happen. And what I was saying is I don't usually get sick. I get sympathy sick, which is weird, and my mom happens to be sick right now, so I haven't had a fever or any other symptoms that go along, just the cough and the runny nose. That's it. So, but that's fun. Good news is it doesn't stop me from doing anything because I'm not actually sick. Just annoyed. But then it does this cool thing to my voice, so that's interesting. Okay. So now we are going to do this same thing going across this shoreline here. The only reason I separated these shorelines is because we've got one that's kind of in the foreground that's going up towards the mountain. I'm just going in and playing. I mean, this is the great thing about watercolor. You can really play around with it a lot. Okay. Stop playing around with it, though. That's what we're doing. We're moving on. So I'm going to paint this line, this shoreline, going across the middle. Now I'm not going all the way up to the other shoreline because I do not want them to mix. We don't have really an option right now to skip, so I'm just not going all the way. So dip it directly in and paint across the bottom. I think the other thing I like about watercolor is it's very laissez-faire, meaning it's just kind of whatever goes. And that's difficult for the kind of artist I am. If you go to my Instagram or anything and look at a lot of my work is very realistic. And watercolor, you can generally look realistic, but it's not as precise. Like if you look at some of my self-portraits and stuff, they're very precise. Like it looks like a photo of me almost. And you just can't get that with watercolor. Watercolor is just too imprecise. It's too. Some people are good at making it precise, and I commend those people. In fact, I cannot think. His last name is Bakari. Marcos, I think. Marcos Bakari. A really amazing watercolor painter. Actually, I'm going to go look it up because I would like to recommend him. I follow him on my Instagram. He is a really amazing watercolor artist. And in fact, some of his paintings don't even, you have to really look close to see that they are watercolor. Okay, so while that's pulling up, I'm going to keep brushing the water. And it's just kind of moving it around. Let's see if I can find one of his paintings quickly. Here we go. Nope, that is somebody else. That does similar style. He does a lot of water paintings where there's water in the image. It's just phenomenal though. So I do want to recommend, and I'll type out his Instagram in the Discord channel so you guys have it. Here we go. Okay, I was right. Marcos Beccari. So he is a Brazilian, and just a really phenomenal watercolor artist. Okay, I'm going to put recommended watercolor artist on Instagram. Okay, so that's done. I like to do things as I come up with them because otherwise I might forget. There's a really good chance that I would forget. Okay, now I can kind of, it should be relatively dry so I can get kind of close to the shoreline. So but I'm still being careful about it. I don't want to ruin that nice shoreline we have there. Okay. All right. So let's see. I'm turning this upside down because I'm not getting, I don't want it to be quite that dark at the top there. And so I'm turning it upside down because I feel like I have better control. I'm pulling the color down into my painting, and for some reason that's easier to do. It's easier to pull down for me. Everybody paints differently, but this is my process. So luckily it's a piece of paper and not like a big canvas, so it's easy to do. I like this shoreline being a dark line. I don't want this shoreline. The shoreline is farther back, so if we make it a little bit more muted, that's going to make it recess a little bit, go backwards. That's actually a trick. At some point I will be talking about atmospheric perspective, but that's called atmospheric perspective. What it is that you use color to make things look like they're going backwards in space. And the more gray and the bluer a color, it makes it appear like it's going backwards. And it's also more muted, and that's the more gray, I guess, but it's not as dark. You think it'd be the opposite, and a lot of times you will see mountains that get darker, but notice they get bluer and grayer too, or more purplish, which is technically bluer. Okay. I'm also taking this opportunity to make my shoreline maybe not as straight of a line because, that's not realistic. You're gonna have like some inconsistencies in your shoreline. So I'm using this opportunity to just kind of muddy it up a little bit and push my shoreline down farther. It's up the direction I'm going right now, but it will be down when I turn it back around. Okay. Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. All right. There's still a very dark line here, and we can go in and fix this later. I mean, I'm going to paint over it a little bit with water in parts and just bring it down into the white a little bit, but we're going to probably fix this with highlights later anyway. You may notice that the more water you paint on, you start pulling little bits of your paper into like up, so you'll see like little nits where bits of paper have come up. That's okay. You don't want too many of those because that means you're starting to degrade the paper, but it's natural to have a little bit of them. All right. I'm going to leave this alone for a minute. You can always re-wet something if you want to mess with it again. So, for example, this down here, I'm not liking how it's ending, so I'm re-wetting it, and I'm just going to pull that color in. All right. There's a big splotch here where I guess some water might have dripped, so I'm just kind of, I take water and I'm just painting over the edges of it, and that just helps move it around. All right. Pretty good. Pretty good. All right, so now we can do our mountains. Our sky should be dry enough. You can always feel it, put your hand on it and make sure. It might be damp, but as long as it's not wet, then we're good to go. So we are going to do the same wet on wet technique. We are going to wet the mountain, and let's see how dry this is down here. That's not as dry as I'd like it to be. So I'm going to actually take my paper towel and just come in here at my edges. There we go. Ta-da! Might as well just do the whole thing. Pulled some color up. We're gonna be messing with that later. Oh. Okay. All right. So wet our mountains. Do the wet on wet technique again. Excuse me. Little sneeze there. So I'm just doing the left side for now. I'm going to get my dark color again and let it kind of spread around. You can get more water on your brush and move it around. Now, the way watercolor paint dries is it will dry to the edges, meaning that it dries outward. So as this dries, it will naturally kind of make it go to the edges and make your edges seem a little darker. I was getting a phone call. Just had to send him to voicemail. Okay. So we've got that. Now I'm going to pick up a little bit of this pure blue on my brush. And it's going to go right in the center here. And you're going to see how drastically this can change the color. Okay, I'm going to get some water on my brush and let it kind of blend into the other color.
Okay. Now that we've introduced this color, we can use it to kind of make different areas stand out in our mountains. So, for example, I'm going to put a little more blue here. And I'm not going to push it around too much. I'm going to let it do its thing. And this will give the impression of like shadows in the mountain. I'm going to probably do a little bit right here. Let's see, maybe some right here. I'm looking at my reference photo too to see where they put them. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna also just put some at the very top of the mountain. Only because I see it in my reference photo. I don't know why they did that. Maybe it was a design choice on their part. I'm not sure. Let's see. But it looks really cool in the reference photo, so why not, you know? What's really cool is to do watercolor out in nature. And go sit outside. That's called en plein air, which is French for in the open air. So, in plein air is what it means. Okay. I'm going to get a little bit of the pure dark color and continue this down. Let those two colors mix together. Picking up a little bit more of this other, the pure blue. All right, I think this side is pretty good. Okay, now we're going to work on the other side. We can just let this blend there. We don't have to do very much with that. All right, so the other side. So first, let's get our dark color down. Remember, we're putting the water. Oops, and I just spilled another drop. So I've got all these places in the sky where I'm accidentally getting water. So it's important, I guess, to wipe maybe a little more than I'm doing. So I'm just doing this first section that we did first. And just blending it around. I'll let that go right up to my edge there. Now, watercolor is additive, so if you paint over something else that already has color there, it's transparent, which means it will blend with that color. If it's the same color, it will just make it look darker. If it's a different color, like say yellow, then it will blend with that and make it seem the mix. That does not happen with acrylic paint. Acrylic paint, you can paint right over the other colors. I'm just fixing a place in the sky there with just pure water where it looks like I dripped. It happens a lot. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit clumsy. So for an artist, being clumsy is not always the best thing. I make up for it by keeping my workspace clean. My number one rule, clean workspace. Okay. Now, let's pick up our blue. So I'm going to mix some down here at the bottom. And let's see. I'll go along the side here. Okay. I'm going to wet my brush so I can blend these a little. Because remember, this side we blended first. let's go into here a little bit, go into the other mountain. At the bottom, it's not going to be too much of a problem. Okay, we'll pick up a little bit of this darker color and bring that in here just for some texture there. It also makes it kind of look like a lower mountain, maybe. All right, let's do the other mountain. Let's see. Well, actually, we're going to come in here and just do a very light of the mixed color in this little connecting section. Okay. I just thought about it. We really probably should let this section dry first before we go crazy on this last section there. We can come across the bottom though. So let's see. I'll just get some water down there. The bottom is going to be darker. It's shadow. So I'm going to pull in some of my dark color and let that kind of spread. Now we want to leave some areas light. Like we don't want all of our areas to be completely dark. So I'm going to let this kind of fade out just a little bit. You can take a dry brush. So I just dry it off with my paper towel and come in and just move some of the water around, and it will gradually get lighter as it goes up, but that at least blends the color. Okay. I just did it again. Where did I drop that? Oh, right here in the mountain. You want to catch it as soon as you see it because it's a pain to try to do it later. Okay. And if you do it, you just kind of move your brush around in it, pushing some of the paint outwards and blending with the area around it. Otherwise, you'll see exactly where you tried to blend it. So sometimes it's cool. I mean, I like, again, it's serendipity. Sometimes you get like an interesting effect that works for you. That's one of those happy accidents like Bob Ross always talks about. So, I try not to overthink it, but, if you can catch it right away, that's good. All right. While I'm waiting for this little section to dry, I think this is a really good time. We're right about our halfway point. I think it's a good time for us to do some breathing exercises. Now, it's funny because my nose is very stopped up today. I can get a little bit. I can get a little bit of breath, but we're going to do butterfly breathing. I don't know if I've done this before, but let's see. How do I want to do this? Okay, I'll do it here. So what you're going to do is take your hands like if you wanted to hit your face. Take your palms towards your face and cross them, okay? You're going to cross them so your thumb. So this is a little bit like if you were making a dove like in the shadow. You're going to hook your thumbs together, and when you breathe in, your hands will come in towards you, and when you breathe out, they'll go back out. Okay? I'm going to close my eyes while I do this, but I will count. So I breathe in for 4 and out for 4. So in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2. Now, normally, you want to breathe in and out through your nostrils.
I'm breathing out through my mouth because it sounds gross, but I don't want to spray snot everywhere. But ideally, you would use your nostrils for both in and out. One more. And we're done. This is my favorite breathing exercise. I'm ready to blow my nose again, excuse me. It's my favorite breathing exercise because it's simple and it combines movement with breathing, which is really important. That's one of the reasons that yoga works so well. It's so effective because of the fact that you're mixing movement and breathing. And there is something called polyvagal theory. I'm not going into it right now. If you're more interested, I have stuff about it on my website, y'all.fit, which is I'm a personal trainer. So I do stress management and personal development out there. But basically your body and brain can communicate back and forth. So if you're mixing movement with breathing, it calms you more than either one of those individually. So it's pretty cool. All right, back to our painting. That was a nice little breather, quite literally a breather. So we're gonna go ahead. It should be pretty dry. Yep, that's pretty good. Get some water, go in here, and we are going to do the same thing. Now remember, I'm leaving a little bit of space in the middle for just like kind of a white space. So when I touch my color, I'm going to make sure I don't bring it all the way down. I just want to keep it kind of up. Okay, I'm getting a lot of the water off, but not all of it, so that I can bring some of the color down into the mountain. Now everybody's mountain and sky and lake and everything is going to look different because, you know, the water does different things for different people. Depends on the kind of paper you have, everything. So do not worry if your mountains look different. That just makes your painting unique. Okay. Let's see. We'll go ahead and pick up a little bit of that pure blue. I'm just going to come in right here, like where the mountain touches the other mountain. I'm drying off my paintbrush. And I'm going to come in and just blend everything around. And because there's already some water there, drying off your paintbrush isn't going to, it's not going to hinder you from being able to move it around. I want to blend the bottom of these mountains a little bit more. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of my darker color. I got some water there. I'm just going over that pencil line just to blend. Drying my brush. All right. I think that's good. Okay. Let's see. Trying to see if there's anything else we need to do to the mountains. Looking at the picture. I think we're okay for now. I think we're okay. All right. Now let's see, I did use some phthalo blue at the top here. Let's do that. Let's take our water. I'm actually maybe even going to do a little bit more over here. So I'm just painting just along the top of the mountain. I'm picking up
a little bit of my pure phthalo blue with a very light touch, barely touching it, and just kind of defining the top of the mountains. I forgot that I had done that. Luckily, I do a lesson plan before I make these, so I can remind myself of the things that I need to do. Okay, so we're going to wet the stuff that I need to cover. Wetting here, picking up a tiny bit of that phthalo blue with a very light touch. And it's going to mix down into the water, and that's okay. We don't mind that. It's going to give it kind of an ethereal look. Ethereal being like airy in appearance. Like it's of a, it's more fantastical. All right, now we need to work on our lake. Since this area is pretty darn dry, we can go ahead and start. All right, so similar to the way we did the sky, we're going to do yellow first in our lake because there's a reflection of the sky. So let's go ahead and wet our lake. Whole lake, just like we did the sky. Now I'm doing it with the smaller brush because we don't have as big of an area, but you could use your large brush for this. But since the area is not that big, it's about the same size as the mountains, there's really no need to use the large brush unless you really want to. Large brush is just for covering a bigger area. Now in acrylic painting, sometimes the large brush is for technique. Like maybe you want that particular type of brush stroke that the filbert gives because it's rounded and flat. But in watercolor, generally it's only just a cover area. That's why it's called a wash brush. Because this is called a wash, is when you really dilute a color and then spread it across a large area. That's a wash. Okay. So we've got our lake all good and wet. Now we're going to pick up a little bit of our yellow. Now this is our reflection, so we're going to do it right at the edge of the lake. And I'm just kind of following. I'm looking at where the mountain is and just kind of following that. Very general. It does not have to be precise at all. Might have a little yellow coming up in here, but not much. In fact, that's a little darker than I even want it. So I'm mixing just pure water with no paint on it. Ooh, oh, that was close. Well, the water almost came pouring over. Another reason why clean workspace is important. If there was anything in front of that, it would have tipped. Okay, so we've got our yellow. Now we're going to come in and bring our blue in. So we're doing our darker mixture. And I'm just starting at the top. I'm going to do this mountain first. That's going to go all the way up to the side of the lake. The shoreline, as it were. And I'm just going to let this come off of our page here. Oh, and it's gotten dry up here towards the top, so wet that. Just painting water directly on here. Letting it mix with the yellow a little. I'm going to bring in some more dark over here where it's the reflection of the mountains. The other reason this doesn't have to be precise is presumably we're somewhere far enough north for this entire area to be snowy, which means that the lake is ice, and ice doesn't reflect the same way water does. It's going to reflect general shapes and colors, but not nearly the same amount of reflection you would get from pure water. So, I mean, I guess ice is pure water. I meant not frozen water, liquid water. All right. The reference photo shows like a little bit of bluish green right here. I'm not sure what that's from. Maybe just kind of going across the bottom like our mountains in the background. All right, I think that's pretty good. Now, we're going to do our highlights. Excuse me. I'm going to take a drink of water. And less good for me. I'm going to eat a piece of chocolate. Okay. So, we're going to work on our highlights. Now, you will need a paper towel for this. I'm just going to keep using it. I'm going to keep using the same little crumpled up paper towel I've been using. It's a little wet, but it's not saturated with paint or water. And what we want to do is we want to create some highlights in our mountains. So we're going to decide where we want our light areas to be. Now, we created a dark area here, and wherever you have a dark area, you're going to have a light area not too far away. So I'm going to do one of my light areas here. I paint the water on, and then you just take your paper towel and dab at it. Now, the more you paint in a certain area, the more you pick up the color and get the color moved around, which means that that area will be lighter. I don't know if you guys can see what it's doing. You can see like it's actually lightening that area there. Now I left this area light, but I'm going to lighten a little section of it even more. So I'm not painting the entire lighter area. And all I'm doing is working my brush around, just a wet brush around. And then I'm going to go dab it up. And so you can see how that area there is quite a bit lighter now than it was before. Again, it's still blue, so you're never going to fully get rid of that blue color. Let's see. I actually want this to kind of come to a point. So I'm working the darker color. After I do that, though, I'm going to after I work this darker color, I'm going to wash my brush off because I don't want any of that blue to come up into the light colors that I'm doing. Okay. Let's see. Looking at the reference photo to see where else we can do some light down here. So I'm just working that brush back and forth and then dabbing. Now, as I told you guys before, watercolor is not my forte. I love it and I will continue to paint it, but there are watercolor people out there that could probably tell you a little bit more about the technique than I. However, I can at least give you the basics, and I feel like a lot of watercolor is testing it out and just kind of playing with it and seeing what you can get it to do, how you can get the colors to mix. I just want to set the expectations for my watercolor classes, that these are all very flowy and haphazard. And I don't know, haphazard's not exactly the word I'm looking for, but I'm not finding it. Serendipitous, I suppose. This is a little steeper than I probably wanted it. So I'm trying to just work out that slope so that it's a little more it's a little less steep, I suppose, is the right wording for that. I don't know. I don't know how. Maybe I'll just leave it like that. All right, let's do some highlights on the other side. Well, okay, wait, hold on. First, I'm going to do a section here, just up and down. Then I'm going to do another little section, which will give it the appearance that it's two separate areas, even though it's not. I might even do a little third section down here. There, nice. Okay, let's go to the other side. All right, let me take a look at this reference photo here. So let's see, I've got a section here that's highlighted. Worst case scenario, if you ever highlight too much out of an area, you can always paint back over it. Let's see, where else? I'm going to do some, kind of like I did over here, some up and down areas. Because rock formations a lot of times do that. They have more of a linear, vertical look. All right. Let's see. What else? What else? I'll do another little linear section here. When I say linear, I mean it's got a very geometric look to it rather than the normal organic appearance of rock formations. Okay. Just to give you an up close of what it's looking like. So you've got 3 little sections because I'm just hollowing them out a little. Then I come in and I do the darker part. I'm going to make that darker part a little broader. I don't think linear is the correct word. I think that's why I keep trying to correct it. Linear has more to do with like a sequence, which they are because they're next to each other, but that's not the correct term. I'm just really having trouble with my words today, so please forgive me. Okay. Let's see, where else? And we already kind of left a big hole in this section, but we can do one area a little brighter. I'm going to bring it down here. I'm wetting. Okay. Now, we want to find some highlights. We're almost done, really. We are going to play around with our shoreline a little bit more. First thing I want to do is I want to take our filbert brush, excuse me, and I'm going to paint just plain water up in the top part and just kind of let it go down into my color. This gives the appearance of like a bank, but it also blends the colors. That was it. That was pretty much the entire, excuse me, one moment. Okay. Let's see. We're going to do the same thing. I'm turning my painting upside down. We're going to do the same thing that we did with the mountains here with our shoreline. I'm painting the edge. And I'm going to take that blue color, the pure phthalo blue, and come to the edge of my lake. Then I'm going to have some darker color and just come in places. I'm just doing like little hash marks. And then I'm going to take my water and further define those. This will create a bank where like where it looks like the snow is more of a hill. The reason I did that blue color is just to kind of mimic what I've already been doing with the mountains. Okay. And because I did that, I'm going to want to highlight some areas up here. So I'm going to go ahead in the upper area, like closer to the mountains. I'm going to wet it like we did in the mountains for the highlight areas. And then dab it. been a very quiet chat today. Not even entirely sure that anyone's watching. But if you are, hopefully you join my Discord channel, which I have turned on down at the bottom of my screen. And I would love for you to share your paintings. I'll do a little critique of mine. And then if you would like to critique yours, you can. All right, let's see. I'm looking to see if there's anything that's standing out to me. Let me look at the reference photo again. Anything that's standing out to me is just like really needing to be done. I don't see a whole lot. In the reference photo, there's a whole lot going on in the sky that I don't have going on. Excuse me. I can get a new napkin now. I think that napkin's sufficiently saturated with paint and color. These are actually leftovers from my acrylic class. I had put it underneath my painting, and I don't like to waste or throw things away. It barely got any color on it. So here's what I might do. There's a lot of drama in the sky in our reference photo. So I'm going to just, with my smaller brush, paint some water, like in the side here. And I'm going to pick up some of my dark color and just kind of splotch it around. And some water. And just let it move. Just let it go where it wants to go and not be too picky about it. Now, as I get closer to my mountain, I don't put very much paint. And the reason for that is because there's always going to be that little peak of light right above the mountain. So that gives that appearance of that. Okay. All I'm doing now is kind of spreading it around, just adding water, allowing it to kind of spread around and be dramatic, do its thing. Let's see. Just using the water to just kind of push the color around. So these are just finishing touches. In reality, we're pretty done with the painting. There's not a whole lot we're adding to it. I might do might actually bring another. They've got two lines of mountains over here, so I did not draw this on. So this is just completely ad hoc. We're just adding a section. Now, I do need to add a little bit of that blue, which is going to kind of mask the yellow that was there. We don't need to mask it too much, but tone it down just a little bit with the darker color. And then we need to blend it with the rest of the mountain so it doesn't look like it's divorced. We want it to look like it's still part of the same slope. So I just accidentally covered some of my earlier work. So I'm just going in there with a paper towel and just dabbing up some of that. Because we did that, I want my yellow in my sky to come a little bit higher. So I'm just working up here. So I'm turning my painting. I don't want to get too close because it is wet. The mountain, I mean. All right. I'm also going to bend this back just a little bit because the water is pooling and I don't want that to happen. Okay. So you guys, I don't know how much you're actually seeing some of this yellow because the light that I've got on my camera is pretty bright. So it looks actually a little more muted in the video than it is here. I can see a lot more yellow on mine. So what I'm going to do, I want to push some of this around. So I'm just taking my large brush and just kind of pushing some of that yellow into the sky. I might pick up a little bit of my blue, the dark blue. Just let that create like a boundary. Not too much of a boundary. We're going to come over here with some, because remember, this whole area of our sky is dark, so I'm bringing in just a little bit of paint, but again, I'm creating drama in the sky. I'm like making it seem like, you know, this is a really interesting morning, very far north. I've always wanted to visit Norway, so who knows, maybe this is a Norwegian sky. I don't know. I used to be obsessed with Norway, guys. I even wrote their tourist bureau when I was in 4th grade and got like all this information on it, like I was gonna go. I mean, my parents, I was ready to go. Didn't care whether my parents wanted to go or not. But I have not been there yet, but I will. All right, I will see a fjord before I die. All right, overall, I think I'm feeling pretty done. Just blending kind of this area here. The bank looks a little bit more natural. Let's see. Oh, you know what? We never... Okay. Let's use our small brush. One little thing. We did not come in here and do... Remember how we did the phthalo, pure phthalo blue? We didn't do that on this edge. I just forgot. So I'm just coming in here and doing that. Remember, light touch. All we're doing is just defining the edge. I did not do a light touch right there, so I need to blend that. And then I don't know. There's something about this lake edge that's bothering me. I'm using a little bit of my dark color. I think I extended the edge down into the lake a little bit more than I had planned. So I'm just going to let some of this dark color take over, and when it dries, it'll dry towards the edges. I don't want to lose too much of the bank that we created earlier. All right, so I'm feeling pretty confident in this painting. So I am going to sign it. Always sign watercolors in pencil. That's tradition. And now let's critique. So I'm going to do it. Excuse me. All right. So just to get this, I'm going to take off the Discord here for a moment. That's the wrong mouse. I have two computers going here. and 3 monitors, so I get confused sometimes. Okay. So, looking at this painting, the way I always work my critiques is that I want to see I want to talk about what's effective and what's working, and then I want to talk about what is not working, what I could add or change in future versions of this painting. So the first thing that I think is effective, I really actually like the edges of my mountains. I think that that's very effective in creating kind of a mood and setting the scene. I'm not as thrilled about the edges of my lake, my shoreline. That is a pretty easy fix, just like I was doing earlier coming in with color. I could just keep working that. And in fact, I do see something I can do right now that I can just go ahead and fix it right this second. I'm going to bring in some of this dark color. I think that will help it out a little bit. And then I'm going to take out, what did I just do with my napkin? I threw it away. So I need a new napkin. Okay. And I'm just going to dab at the edges of that. Yeah. Nah, that's better. I like that. Okay. So, but basically that's what you would do. You would just go in. The great thing about watercolor is you can rework it. You can get it wet again. And in fact, like these paints here, I'm not going to clean this. I'm not going to wash it out. I will leave these and just re-wet them next time. So that is the best thing, the second best thing about watercolor, the best being that it just kind of does its own thing, and the water takes it to interesting places. So that's, to me, the best thing about watercolor. All right. So my edges, those are the things that I think I need to both work on and I think are effective. Something else, I could probably still use some more drama in the sky. I could probably come in and do like some splotchiness. I'm going to leave it alone for now. I actually am okay with it the way it is now. Once this completely dries, I'm going to smush it under some heavy books. I'm going to put like maybe 3 or 4 pretty heavy books. And I found that Stephen King and Harry Potter books are really good for this because they're nice and big if you have the hardback, that is, the hardcover. But anyway, you just smush it, leave it for like a few days, like 3 or 4 days, just smushed, and it will flatten out. The other option, if you needed to flatten it very quickly, once it's completely dry, you can turn it over. You can spray it with like a starch or a like light spritzing of water or wrinkle release type thing, and you could iron it. That is a last resort, though. I would not do that because you could run the risk of ruining the painting. You'd have to really know what you were doing. So that is it. If there's anybody in chat that would like to share their image on my Discord channel, I also on my Discord channel, if you missed it, I shared the name of a brilliant watercolor artist from Brazil named Marcos Bacari, who I put his Instagram in our Discord channel. Let me bring the Discord channel back up so you guys can see. That is the permanent link. So please join us. You can add any picture you want. It doesn't have to be the one that we worked on today. It can be anything that you're currently working on, including digital. If you would like my feedback or if you want to discuss it, I'm always open to that. If there aren't any questions, then you guys have a fantastic day, and I look forward to working with you next time. We will be doing drawing.